Hi, everybody. I'd like to welcome you today to Inside the Gallery. My name is John Threlfall, and I'm the Communications and Special Projects Officer for UVic's Faculty of Fine Arts. I'm happy to be moderating today's conversation between McKaila Ferguson, give us a wave, McKaila, and Jenelle Pasiechnik. Jenelle, you want to wave? There we go, great. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge and respect the Lekwungen peoples on whose traditional territory the University of Victoria stands, and the Songhees, Esquimalt, and Wasanich peoples whose historical relationships with the land continue to this day. That historical relationship is an important thing to keep in mind at all times, given that a sense of place, history, and personal experience informs so much of our lives and our creative practices. Every day I feel fortunate to be able to work, live, learn, play, create, and do ritual and raise my children here. So thanks for joining us today. We're going to get started. So let me just give you a quick little introduction into our speakers. McKaila Ferguson has a bachelor's honors from UVic's Department of Art History and Visual Studies, as well as a master's in museology and museum studies from the University of Glasgow. She has worked as a collections and conservation and exhibition assistant at a World Heritage Site in the UK, as well as an education and programming coordinator before taking up her current position as Operations and Development Officer for the Penticton and District Community Arts Council. Jenelle Pasiechnik has both a bachelor's honors and master's in HVS here at UVic, and among her other experiences, has worked as curatorial assistant and exhibition engagement facilitator with the Art Gallery of Greater Victoria, before taking on her current position as curator of contemporary art at the Campbell River Art Gallery. So yeah, McKaila, let's start with you. Can you give us a little brief outline of your path out of university and into your current career?
Yes, thank you. I just would also like to say that I'm zooming in from the traditional unceded territories of the Syilx Okanagan Nation. I'm very grateful to be here and thank you for inviting me to this talk. So as you mentioned, I have a bachelor's from UVic as well as a master's from the University of Glasgow. My experience out of school has been quite varied. So I worked installing and designing contemporary exhibitions at a World Heritage Site in New Lanark. I assisted with the decant process of a 6,000 piece museum collection in Scotland as well. I've worked with various collections and exhibition teams for various private and public galleries and museums, both in Canada and in the UK. I've worked with various arts councils here in BC, as well as in the UK. I worked with various heritage organizations for a big digital storytelling project that was funded by the European Union. And currently I'm working in operations and development at the Arts Council here in Penticton. And I'm also a regional director on the board of directors for Arts BC. And I do a little bit of work with the BC Museums Association on their professional development committee.
That's that's a whole lot. That's great.
Lots of very different, adventures.
Remind me, if we don't get to it right away, remind me to come back to the question of after all that experience in the UK and overseas, what brought you back to Penticton? But we'll talk about that one later. Jenelle, same question out to you. How did you get to where you are now?
Yeah, so thank you so much for having me today. And I am zooming in from the traditional territories of the Likwata speaking peoples of the Wiwakam, and Kwika First Nations. And I want to express my gratitude for being an uninvited settler on these territories as well. So out of university, it took me a few years to find this job. So in the interim period, I worked as a curatorial assistant with Hamish Sivanesan at the Art Gallery of Greater Victoria. And that position came to me from a long period of volunteer with that institution. I probably volunteered there for about 6 years before I was selected by Hema to work with her on that particular project. I also was working actually as an administrative assistant to a financial advisor when I heard about this job. So I did have to go off script a little bit. And Victoria is a small city, so it was imperative that I applied outside of the city, and I was helped by that. By doing the co-op programs, both in my undergraduate and graduate degrees. I worked at the Campbell River Art Gallery in the last year of my undergraduate, right before I started my master's, as the programming and outreach assistant. And so that started to create a network for me in Campbell River, and the woman who was my boss sent me a message and said, hey, there's this curator position here. You know, you should really apply for it. And I really kind of had, I guess, an imposter syndrome at that time about becoming the sole curator of an institution, but I decided to really go for it just because I was working out of field, and I really, really wanted to, start that career and get it going. And I ended up getting the job. So believe in yourselves.
Absolutely. You know what? When you were talking, I was like, oh, I bet the imposter syndrome popped up there. Everybody in the arts, probably everybody in life, but everybody in the arts always deals with that at some point. Absolutely. So how long have you been at Campbell River now?
4 years.
4 years, yeah. And McKaila, how about you? How long in Penticton?
In Penticton, I've been here since January 2019.
2019. Okay, great. So the topic, before we go any further, I'll just say to the audience, if you have questions for our guests, just post them using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Just post the questions and we'll happy to answer any questions you have. The intention of this talk is to share experiences of our young alumni, of how they left university and got started. So if there's anything you want to know, just shoot us a question and we'll be happy to answer that. The title of this talk is Inside the Gallery. So I think one place to start would be, what is the reality of daily life in a regional art gallery? Like, what on a day-to-day basis, what do you each do? McKaila, let's start with you.
Lots of emails constantly. Probably half of most of my day or my week rather is emailing. But since I do operations and development, I do a lot of outreach into the community. So a lot of the time, the Penticton Arts Council operates a historic building in Penticton called the Lear House. And here we manage the building, and we have 8 artists in residence, 2 gallery spaces. Upstairs, we have the Penticton Academy of Music and Dramatic Arts, and in the basement, we have community art rooms and the Penticton Potters Guild. So I do a lot of stuff sort of in the house, making sure everyone has what they need. I do a lot with organizing exhibitions. I do the hanging of all the shows here. But I also do a lot of outreach into the community. We work with a lot of different social service groups here in Penticton. And so I'll have a lot of meetings offsite as well. And of course, since we're a community arts council, I have lots of meetings and conversations with artists in the community, as well as throughout BC, pretty much every day.
Do you have a creative practice yourself? Like, are you an artist as well, or?
Definitely not. Definitely more administrative.
Sure. I think there's that perception that, sometimes you need to be an artist to work in the gallery world. And I don't think that's always true. So, Jenelle, how about you? What's your daily life look like?
I guess I think right now is a really good example of the dynamism of this particular job. We are installing an exhibition, so there are walls being built and walls being painted, and so I'm vacillating between helping carry 4x8 sheets of plywood into the gallery and have prospective artists meetings and writing and sending out contracts, and then helping interpret them with artists and doing planning for the summer of 22, the fall of 22, and the fall of 23. So you're always kind of managing multiple timelines at one time. We're thinking currently about grants that we'll be writing for 23. So we're planning on what artists we want to be in those shows, what is the shape of those shows, as well as planning for now, planning for the types of programming we'll be putting on for this next show, ensuring that the artists have accommodation and travel, and that they're provided for. Lots of administrative work, managing budgets. And that goes all the way from envisioning a budget on a grant application to creating it with the accounting team and then managing it as you have it in reality. So there are these, I'd say there's a kind of lovely scale between very creative, fulfilling work, and then hands-on building and setting up, and then lots of administration and a lot of project management, a lot of kind of multiple things going on at once, and then, doing the dishes at the end of the day.
The classy stuff. How long do your exhibitions run?
We just extended them, so now they're running at 10 weeks a piece. Yeah.
Okay. So that's sizable. And then, do you, as curator, do you have like a big wall where you sketch things out and say, okay, we've got somebody who's working in photography, so let's not put that back to back with another photographer. Let's put that back to back with, say, a sculptor. Like, do you do that kind of nuts and bolts planning, or is it more about this artist's availability, this artist's availability, this one?
We do. There's a big wall behind me where all of our shows up through 25 are kind of sticky noted. But what I think the way I like to work is to think about what kinds of conversations do we need to have in Campbell River, and what kinds of conversations haven't we had yet. So in the summer, for instance, we have a show coming up that's just like a discussion, a dialogue around the Black experience in Canada, because that's an important conversation that really hasn't been had in Campbell River at this juncture. And so I do approach my curatorial work in a way that bridges on, I guess, kind of identity-based politics, because we do have a social justice mandate that focuses on giving voice to underrepresented constituencies. So we're always thinking about whose voice should we be hearing right now? Who is it important to elevate their voice and to make space for those voices?
McKaila, how does that compare with what you do in Penticton? I know you're not the curator there, but like, does the gallery take a similar role in the community? Do you have anything about deciding what kind of conversations you need to have, or?
Definitely. At the Arts Council, we are very community-based, and so a lot of our shows are from community. They're from our artists in residence, or we're doing lots of work with different social service groups to bring in their artwork as well. So we do have some capital A artists come through the Lear House, but we also do a lot of work with community and outreach. And similarly, we do plan out, we try to have a year out in our planning, but of course, with a pandemic and the state of the world, it's not really locked in place. Things are always open. And it also depends on what grants we can get. Like right now, we're doing our gaming grant. Woohoo! Gaming never ends. So yeah, it's a lot of juggling and seeing what will fit. We do a lot of work with senior artists. So we sort of try to take big themes through the community and then let our community artists interpret what's going on.
Can you give us an example of a theme?
Well, right now we have an exhibition from the artists from the North Okanagan Federation of Canadian Artists. We try to bring in one show a year from a group outside of the South Okanagan. And the show is called Aging Art and the Modern Elder. And so all the artists are 55 plus, and they created a bunch of artwork reflecting their experience as elders in their community. And it's a super cool show, very uplifting. There's a video of all the artists talking about their pieces on our website. the pentictonartscouncil.com if anyone wants to check that out. But we try to have the artists speak about their own work, like with their own voices as much as possible. And this show right now really reflects that.
Great, great. Let me ask you both a question about programming. When it comes to the art you're going to show, McKaila, you just said you put out a call for artists. Is that correct? Like you'll have a theme and then you'll call for artists?
Sometimes.
Sometimes, yeah.
Yeah.
And then Jenelle, for you, is it do you get people approaching you saying, I would like to show in your gallery, or similarly, do you put out a call for a certain themed exhibit? How does that work?
So we have an adjudication process. We accept proposals on a rolling basis and we adjudicate once a year. And then we also, I'm like the little idea engine here. So I come up with the thematics for the exhibition and then most exhibitions, and then reach out to prospective artists and co-curators.
You're both working in smaller centers, smaller than Victoria, which is smaller than Vancouver, which is smaller than Toronto. So, it's concentric circles. I wonder if you could both say something about the role of the art gallery in a smaller regional center. Jenelle, we'll start with you, just because you're saying that you've got a social justice platform, and before, when we were chatting ahead of this, you were saying you do showcase artists from across Canada as well. So how does the regional art gallery fit into your community, and what role does it play?
Yeah, so we are pan-Canadian contemporary, and like McKaila was saying, what we do is filter the national conversation through the local context. And it's very important to me, I think, also to expose our communities to the wider conversation, to expose them to great artists and great work that's being done on the national level, and to bring in those conversations into the community. So it's kind of a two-way filter in that sense. We want to bring in shows that are relevant to the local community that people can connect with, but we also want to demonstrate that we are also a part of a wider conversation, and we want to, I think, show our relevancy in that conversation by putting together these shows that are a part of that. But then also it is really important to expose our local artists and community to the kind of amazing breadth of talent that we have across the country.
And you would do artist talks for each exhibit that you had in, something like that?
Exactly. And that was one thing that I think we lost during the pandemic that is very special, especially for a smaller gallery. Our fees aren't as high, for instance, as like the category 3 galleries, but what we do have is the ability to really show hospitality to artists when they come to us. And so we really pride ourselves in bringing artists in to do their install, or to be here for opening, or to do readings or performances or presentations that, for one, really highlight their talents, but also create these amazing opportunities for our local community to connect with these folks. And once you kind of see an artist talk about their own work or see them perform, and then you go back into the show, and the level of connection and engagement just goes through the roof, I think.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. McKaila, how about you? How does Penticton react to your gallery? You said earlier that you had things going on multiple floors. You had music classes. You had all sorts of things happening. It sounds like Lear House is a fairly vibrant location for the community.
Oh yeah, it's bumping for sure. It's the party house on the street, definitely. And I completely echo everything Jenelle just said, with really engaging with the community, bringing people to the house. A lot of the time our artists like to sit in the exhibition. And so when you come to see the exhibitions here, a lot of the time artists will be here and you can talk to them, because there's only so much you can get from an object label or from me trying to interpret what's going on. So if the artist is there, it's a super cool experience for the visitor and the artist. And similar to what's happening in Campbell River, we try and create programming or outreach initiatives related to what's going on in the house. And with COVID, It was interesting because we usually have artist talks and things like that as well. But we found here in Penticton, since it's such a small place and everyone is really connected, after everything went online, a lot of our community members were even more cut off because they may not have had access to the internet or have a computer or things like that. And so we did a complete 180 and totally shifted what we did. And we did like take and make projects, and we made like thousands of them over the past couple of years in the pandemic and sent them out through our social service partners into the community. And we still do that. So we're kind of doing a hybrid, what we used to be doing, while also putting sort of tangible things out into the community. And then hopefully those folks, when they feel comfortable coming back, they can come back and hang out with us.
Nice. Let me peel this back because we're in this institutional setting here. Let me peel this back to when you were both students in art history, undergrad students specifically in art history. Did you foresee a time when you would be doing what you're doing now? Does your current path have roots in what you were studying or what you're interested in as undergrads? Jenelle, let's go with you.
I don't think that I foresaw myself becoming a curator when I was in my undergrad degree. I really thought that I would go on and do a PhD. I wanted a place in the institutional setting and I wanted to become a professor. However, that being said, I really spent a lot of time working with the art history professors in the department that taught Middle Eastern and Islamic studies and archaeology. And what I learned from that, or what became extremely apparent to me, was the kind of inequity in the way, especially from a Western lens, we look at other forms of knowledge from across the planet. And we are often thinking of ourselves as the originators of all things. And so that has really, had a massive influence on the way I think about other forms of cultural knowledge and cultural visibilities. And that is really, I would say, the most important kind of seed of my curatorial methodology, is to make those erased stories visible and to raise those voices that are underrepresented or ill-represented.
Hey, as a curator, I can see you, especially a contemporary curator, I can see you applying that lens all the time and really having a responsibility to the community to think about who isn't represented, who could be or should be represented, and taking steps to make that happen. That's great.
Yeah, and rather than representing them, making space, as McKaila said, for them to speak from their own perspective and to hear their own voices. And I think that that's really important as a settler curator, to hold space and to hold structure, for not to speak for or over people, but yeah, for them to speak.
Let's come back to that point in a minute, because that's very interesting. McKaila, how about you?
Well, when I was in my undergrad, I had all these hopes and dreams of becoming a curator, because in my mind, curators got to hang out with objects all day. And I'm all about object handling, and I love that. But then when I went and did my master's, since it was a very practical course, very project-based in museum studies, it was there that I learned that you actually get to hang out with the objects when you're in collections. And I know that is very different in smaller to medium-sized to larger institutions. There's a lot of crossover. But in medium to large institutions, you get to hang out with the objects. And that's where my passion lies, is hanging out with objects. But I also love people, which is why I love working with arts councils, because you work with artists every single day and you help them do whatever it is that they want to do in their life. And so I go between museums and galleries and arts councils. Like I've sort of seen that back and forth when I look back through my CV, because as I spoke about earlier, I've done some very diverse, different things. And every time I get a new project or a new contract, I'm like, wow, this is super like out of the blue, like this is really interesting. But then looking back, they all have this sort of through line of either objects or connecting with people.
We've got a question that just came in relevant to the current conversation. I love this piece of bringing in the community. I wonder if you could reflect on how you negotiate bringing in those artists who are underrepresented, and the idea that the most underrepresented groups may not have the tools or resources to create their own exhibitions, or even consider their practices to be something that can be displayed formally. So how do you negotiate bringing in those artists who are underrepresented? Jenelle, do you want to start with this one? Because before we went live, you were talking about an exhibit representing trans artists. So that might be a good example of artists who are underrepresented. But yeah, how do you negotiate that?
Okay, well, I think maybe what there is an allusion to is the idea of oral traditions and histories, or the so-called kind of divide between low art, high art, or things that may not be considered to have a place in the gallery. And I think we're in an era where we have torn down those walls and we need to continue to tear them down. And you can take oral histories and you can record them and play them so that people can have an oral experience while they're looking at things in the gallery. So I think there are always creative ways around bringing in so-called non-traditional or different types of media. And then this show that we're talking about the trans experience, for instance, we're reaching out to professional artists that are like comfortable working through that lens. They self-identify working through that lens, and they are each kind of working on different sides of that trans perspective. So bringing them all together to create a really kaleidoscopic conversation allows for, community kind of across Vancouver Island that either identifies or needs to learn about to come and to have that experience. And then we work very hard to create programming that creates safe spaces for people to feel welcome, but also to ask questions. And when you are curating difficult knowledge, you have to understand that there is a huge piece around outreach and cultural safety that has to be looked after and treated responsibly.
Do you ever feel completely out of your depth when it comes to presenting something and you just feel like you're not the person who should be speaking about this?
I do. And this year and next year, the exhibition programming at the Craig is a really good example of that. And there's also, as a cisgendered settler curator, it's important for me to acknowledge that I just don't have some points of experience. And so being collaborative and reaching out to co-curators that do share those points of experience allows me to be a part of a conversation and to hold space and structure for things that I don't fully understand, but not to be getting in somewhere and trying to do things that I really have no point of experience to be engaging in. So it's very important, I think, also that when you're doing these types of shows, you need to really work on relationship building and bring in different types of expertise so that you can still engage in these conversations, but responsibly and respectfully.
Yeah, sounds like lifelong learning and community building every day.
Yeah, definitely.
McKaila, how about you negotiate bringing in artists who are underrepresented? And maybe you can touch on the idea of people who have practices that they don't feel like can be displayed formally.
Totally. So there's two parts to that here at the Arts Council. So we work with marginalized communities often through our social service partners. So here in Penticton, we have the South Okanagan Women in Need Society. We have the South Okanagan Immigrant and Community Services. We work with the Foundry, like various groups like that who are already working with these communities. And so oftentimes they'll approach us and ask us for like art related resources, which totally vary depending on what project they're working on or what group it is. And we showcase some of this art as well here. But since this is a historic building, our hanging mechanisms are a bit of a pain in the butt. We can't, all the walls are plaster, so we can't use the old-fashioned hammer and nail, which I'm partial to. And so if the artwork is particularly tricky to install, we will bring this art out into the community, into other spaces, like the mall, for example, City Hall, various other locations in town. And we also find that that helps with the outreach, because it's bringing the artwork out of the sort of like white wall gallery where, depending on the project, of course, people may not feel comfortable coming into these spaces. And so we have found a lot of success in bringing the artwork outside of our building and engaging with community there.
Yeah, that's great. Great. Jenelle, do you do that up in Campbell River?
We are working on expanding the space of the gallery. So we have the kind of main gallery, the white cube, where we can hammer right into the walls, and we're building walls, and we project and we sound and we do all of that kind of stuff. And we are also expanding out into our lobby. We've written a grant for a screen that sits on the outside of the building. We've done outreach into the public square that's directly outside of the gallery. So we do push the boundaries of our space in that respect. But I think the conversation really speaks to the extremely valuable and important heterogeneity of the different roles of the public art gallery and the Arts Council, and how they work together to create a diverse synergy in a small place.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because you're both in areas, Penticton and Campbell River, where it's probably just not so much of a white audience as it would be, say, here in Victoria. Victoria is traditionally a very white town, whereas Campbell River, I think of it being quite diverse, and Penticton, I imagine, can be as well. Interesting. Do you find that there's still people like, okay, so here's a totally random thing. On a daily basis, do you have somebody coming into your spaces who are like, I've never been to an art gallery before. This is really great. Is there a sense of discovery for people still with art? I've been born and raised in the art world. My mom's an artist and my wife's an artist. So I always find that fascinating when people sort of discover an art gallery.
I think that we're almost always combating invisibility as well. Something that I hear is like, oh, I didn't know we had an art gallery. We're a pretty small city, and people, have lived here for some time. So it is a conversation that we are having so very often. Whereas if you're in a city with much higher critical mass for cultural visitation, you're not always justifying your relevance and presence in a place, which is a conversation that we have to have here very frequently.
Yeah, McKaila, same with you, or?
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I always think, because similar to what you were saying, John, my family, we've always been very interested in the arts. And whenever I travel, like I'm the person who has the 3,000 museums I need to see in the 2 days I'm in this new place, right? So I seek out these places actively. But here, like the Lear House, it's a cultural heritage building, and it's been here since 1920. And there's people who have lived here and raise their kids here and raise their grandchildren here, who still come in and say, oh, I didn't know this was here. It's very interesting, but like since we are a community arts council, we do a little bit with tourism here, but we are definitely more community involved. But we do work a lot with the Penticton Art Gallery. I used to work there. They're just down the street. And like Jenelle was saying, as an arts council, we have a bit of a different role than a public art gallery, but we both work in tandem to create like a holistic arts sort of vibe in the community for both tourists and the community.
Let me throw back to another student-focused question. Let's say you're a current student, whether that's an undergrad or a graduate student, and you like the idea of moving into a professional practice of some kind in the art world. What are some good steps you can take? Did either of you volunteer? Is volunteering a viable path? Joining boards? Anything along that line? What do you suggest?
I volunteered a lot, especially during my undergrad, and I have to credit volunteering with coming onto the radar of curators that I was working with, and then also just learning the different roles that exist within the gallery and the different spaces that you can occupy. I also did co-op, which I think is super important, again, for kind of trying on different job roles and seeing what fits you. I also think that the residency system is underutilized, or even that a lot of students are not familiar with this type of non-traditional training that's outside of the institution that can also really help move someone's career along.
What can you give me an example of residency?
Yeah, so the Banff Center is a very famous place for residency. They're all across the country, and they're often these great opportunities to go someplace and be a part of a cohort sometimes it's mixed between artists and curators and administrators. I did one in the Nederlands that was incredible at the Bach Institute. And it was just a week of artists and curators and administrators working together and doing activities and being completely immersed and learning from each other and learning other global perspectives as well. And so even within Canada, you're going to be learning about different regional perspectives and the size of the institutions people are working in. And so there is that really applied form of education that you can receive, allows you to be a little bit more mobile. And there are some carbon consequences to the residency system, but it is a kind of alternative way to try things out and to have a learning experience.
And those networking opportunities, they're so invaluable.
They really are.
Yeah, McKaila, how about you? Did you do any volunteering when you were a student?
Yes, I get very involved in the communities that I'm in. I've lived in various places in different cities. But when I was at UVic, I did the co-op with Iona, who I love. I miss her a lot. And of course, getting involved with the student associations. And in my undergrad, a lot of us wanted a conference experience to put on our CVs, because a lot of us were applying to master's programs. And so I was a part of the team that created the art history undergraduate conference. So if there's something you want to do and it's not there, then make it and sort of take charge that way. But similar to what Jenelle was saying, also looking outside of the institution. So I volunteered for a bit with the Victoria Arts Council, and then they hired me on as their volunteer coordinator. So I was working there part-time for 2 years during my undergrad, as well as with Iona. And then overseas in the UK, a lot of the contracts that I got were through volunteering. And again, like all the networks, like all of the different organizations that I had the chance to work with, going to lots of things, like going to conferences, talking to people, networking with them, connecting with them on LinkedIn or Instagram so that that connection remains more than just that one day that you met them. Because I've learned that the world is very small and the arts world is smaller still. Everybody knows someone who knows someone. And your classmates and the artists in the visual arts department just across the road there will be your colleagues one day. Like people who I've gone to school with are working in institutions all across the whole world right now, and I've worked on various projects with them. So yeah, just take advantage of the people around you, and if there's something that you want to happen and it's not there, then make it happen. You've got the power.
Yeah. I think the the takeaway is always say yes. Like when you have an opportunity, embrace that opportunity and see where it takes you. Keep that mental Rolodex of people in your head. So when somebody asks you a question about, do you know anybody who works in this area? You're like, yes, I do actually. And then you can at least just get the ball rolling. Is there one thing that you wish you had known or done while you were still a student, apropos to your work now? Jenelle, let's go with you.
One thing that I wish I had known or done.
Could be an opportunity, could be a course, could be a discussion, a connection.
Yeah, I guess I did a few conferences, but mostly internal. I think that I would have tried to have my written work, go further afield to conferences. Another thing I think that it is a lot of work, but grant applications. There are travel monies, there are conference monies, there are publishing monies, there are Commonwealth monies. There's so much out there. The applications are a lot and you have to really look for them and you have to, get the letters of reference and all that stuff. But the richer you can make your experience while you're in the protection of the institution makes being outside its walls easier afterward, because when the door kind of shuts on you, you do realize that you're on your own.
Sure.
And so whatever opportunities, like McKaila was saying, join the clubs, sit on the boards, be on the committees, say yes to everything. Yeah.
McKaila, what about you? Is there anything you wish you'd known or done?
I totally agree with everything Jenelle said. Like the imposter syndrome has always been there and will never go away. And I wish, like, of course, many people can tell you that, but you'll say, yeah, okay, great. But then in the back of your mind, you're always thinking about that. When I was an undergrad, I wished that I applied to more conferences outside of the university as well. And there is money there, like there is lots of grants that you can apply for, and I wish that I had known about those, especially because every day now it seems I'm writing grants and so you never lose that skill. It's always going to be there with you. But also, like I said before, you think the world is really big when you're in your undergrad because you're learning sort of global art history and, oh, that's so far away. But everything is connected and everybody knows everyone, and the industry is very small, which is comforting because you're kind of a phone call away from anybody, or a Zoom call, I guess, in these times.
Yeah.
Which reminds me, I think I also would have done more Canadian art history.
Oh, interesting.
I think like McKaila was saying, we're learning about this big world, and we're learning about things that are far away. And often we're far more interested in things that are beyond our borders. But there is an incredible plethora of amazing artists that work in Canada. And if you intend to work in Canada, you should be knowledgeable about the field.
Interestingly, again, before we went live, McKaila and I were talking. She'd recommended a book to me a couple of weeks ago about caribou artists, and I read it, and I passed it to my mom, who had a connection with one of the artists, two of the artists in the book. And the idea of Canadian art too is that it's not that far away from where we are now. You know, like you can find yourself only 1 or 2 steps removed in many cases from these notable pieces. I think it's really quite fascinating. The other thing I'll just touch on briefly is you both mentioned this now, but those intangible skills you come away from university with, you know, things like writing and presentation skills and communication skills. Quite often students think, oh, I'm taking this course in subject X and that's what I'm learning. Whereas in fact, you're also learning how to write a short précis, you know, how to do a paper, how to do a crash research project on something you have no idea about, but you need to do, you know, how to talk to peers and colleagues and professors who you feel or might be on a different level with you, how to present to an audience, public speaking, all of those skills. I think they're just invaluable. And I often think students don't realize until they get out in the world how valuable those are, in addition to, I got a credit for modern European art, you know, something like that. There's no question there. I was just reflecting on that for the both. Here's one of these conversational questions. What's the best piece of advice you ever got from someone? Did anybody ever give you something that you're just like, that's great, I'm going to take that and run with it in my life? Jenelle, how about you?
The best piece of advice I've ever gotten. Let me think here. McKaila, if you have yours ready to go, you can go ahead.
The best piece of advice that applies to more things than it would seem, I got from my grandfather. And he always told me to measure twice and cut once. I don't know, and it's not just about exhibition installation. That applies to everything. And I find myself probably once a month, I'm doing something, then I hear his voice in the back of my head. Because he is such a perfectionist. I couldn't imagine working with him on a project, like colleague to colleague. Like, he is meticulous. And so I have learned a lot from him in that way, but definitely measure twice.
Cut once. That's good. That's good. That's just about being prepared, you know. Yeah, that's great. Jenelle, just so the one I got that I'll throw there if you're still mulling. If you knock on a door, be prepared to walk through it. And I've always loved that, because mentally that image, it just says so much, you know, like, sure, I might be able to knock on a certain door, but am I ready to go through it? If somebody answers it and they say, yeah, come on in, let's talk. Am I ready to talk? Am I ready to present whatever it is? You know, these days you hear a lot about elevator pitches. It's the same kind of thing. You know, you've got to be ready to walk through that door.
Absolutely. I guess probably the best advice that I've gotten has been demonstrated to me. I had the privilege of working with Hema Sivanesan at the Art Gallery of Greater Victoria, and she's a phenomenal curator and researcher, but is assertive and sets boundaries and knows what she wants from things, but builds relationships in a beautiful and meaningful way, but doesn't allow artists to overstep or other folks, and just to really kind of understand what your professional and personal boundaries are, and how to be able to assert them, and how to be able to say no gently, or to, you know, to bring people into a relationship that's more meaningful than just project or transactional. And I guess just watching someone kind of work that magic demonstrated to me the level of grace that you can exhibit while working in the profession and getting it done.
That was lovely. I know Hema, and just when you said level of grace, that totally fits how I think of her. How she carries herself, how she speaks, how she moves in a room. That's lovely. That's lovely. Have you learned how to say no gracefully?
I'm learning.
I think with the imposter syndrome, that's one of the most difficult things out there is how to say no. You know?
Yes.
And when to say no, not just how to say no, but when to say no as well. Well, that's great. I just cognizant of time here. We're just on the wrap up. If there's any last questions from the audience, if anybody wants to throw one more question or two more questions out there, we probably have time for a couple more, not much time, but make that offer just before we start wrapping things up. All right, here's a random question. So you're both alumni, you're both art history and visual studies alumni. Have you ever been approached by current students, or would you be open to being approached by current students for, you know, an informational interview, or just to offer advice, or to just make a connection? You know, we're talking about connections, we're talking about networking. Is that something you've encountered yet?
Definitely. I've worked with a few faculty members. We've had shows here. I've also had studio visits and visits with artists that have come out of the VA MA. We're always happy to keep those connections. And I mean, vice versa. It's nice for us to be able to sort of come home and have these conversations and, you know, and contribute as well in that respect.
Yeah. It drives me nuts when people think of the institution as being one way. You know, like it is very much a two-way street. You know, it's learning, but then being out in the community and staying connected. It's such a huge network of people. You know, fine arts for over 50 years. You think about the connections that are out in the community over 50 years that have been built. It's remarkable.
It is.
McKaila, how about you? Connections with students or any opportunities there?
Yeah, I've had a couple of undergrads reach out and ask for help with MA or other master's applications, which I'm totally happy to do. I believe in knowledge sharing and resource sharing. There's a lot of unknowns out there, and just reach out and ask the question. I'm more than happy to help or look over any applications or anything, because been there, done that. And I've reached out when I was an undergrad. I reached out to past alumni as well, and they really helped me sort of feel confident to apply for things. And just even reading over my CV, just a quick glance from someone who's been in that position is really helpful. So, and I've done that for students now. So, and I'm more than happy to share the knowledge, especially with grant writing, because it's so much fun. So I'm happy to help with that.
One of you had mentioned LinkedIn, and you know, I can't stress enough what a good resource that is for people to be able to see connections that you might not know they have, or just a way of discovering people. So I would encourage anyone listening to make sure you have a LinkedIn account and to keep it up to date as well.
Absolutely. I should say too that we love to hire UVic co-op students. Wink, wink. So, and co-op time is coming up, so don't forget to search your database. Another thing that's really helped me that McKaila mentioned was Instagram. When you talk to an artist and you know what they look like, for one, so you can identify them in a room, but you can also speak to work that they've done or an exhibition that they've already had. You have all these openers for conversations that can be really valuable and show that you're really interested in them and you've taken the time to learn about them. Often that helps bring walls down in a big way.
That's something that's, you know, great segue. Because the next session in this series coming up on March 25th is called Are You Media Ready? And it's an young alumni, Cormac O'Brien, who works for, he's the social media manager for 6 Shooter Records in Toronto now, an indie record label out there. And he's going to be talking specifically about working with the media, working with your own social media platforms, the kind of things that you put out there. And when people, exactly like you just said, when people look you up on Instagram, what are they going to see? Are they going to see pictures of you as an artist and your work and a representation of your professional practice? Or are they going to see vacation pictures and party pictures and pictures of your cat? You know, what are they going to find when they look you up? So that's the next one we're going to be doing there. And then after that, on April the 4th, we're having another session with Carolyn Riddell, who is one of the Legacy Gallery curators, but is currently working with Co-op and Careers. And she's going to be doing a session on finding meaningful work in the arts. So those are 2 more sessions we've got coming up. And that's something I think a lot of young alumni don't know, is that after they graduate, they can continue to work with Co-op and Careers and get resume advice, get some job finding skills and things like that. So those are the next 2 that are coming up. Aware of our time ticking away, I just want to say thank you very much for this conversation today. I thought it was really interesting. I had a great time. I appreciate both of you spending the time with us and answering questions from our audience. McKaila Ferguson and Jenelle Pasiechnik, thank you so much.
Thank you. I had a great time too.
Great.
Thanks so much.
Okay. Take care. Bye, everybody.
Bye.